Welcome to this week's Sobol Says for Parshas Emor. I first wanted to wish a happy birthday to my friend Joey G, who celebrates his birthday this week. Also, in case you're wondering, yes, my beard is as uncomfortable as it appears. Okay, so I thought rather than have a perfunctory review of the Parsha this week, that we would instead just focus on one or perhaps two, depending on our timing, topics or incidents in the Parsha to see what we can glean from them. And so I would like to start at the end, and then if we have time, we will end at the start. So if you turn to page 690, Pasuk 10, this is really, frankly, Emor for the most part is just discussing Kohanim, of course, as well as the different holidays. You could obviously use any one of them as a springboard to discuss many things. However, in terms of actual story and drama, there is very little in this week's Parsha. However, there is an exception to that, and that occurs towards the end of the Parsha. So as I said on page 690, Pasuk 10, it tells the story of the Mekalel. So it says, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelis v'hu ben Ish Mitzri b'zoch ben Yisrael vayinatzu b'machane ben ha-Yisraelis v'ish ha-Yisraeli vayikov ben ha-Isha Yisraelis Hashem vayikalel vayiviu also el Moshe v'shem imo Shlomis bas Divri lamate Dan. So it says, the son of an Israelite woman went out, and he was the son of an Egyptian man among the children of Israel. They fought in the camp, the son of the Israelite woman and an Israelite man. The son of the Israelite woman pronounced the name, that means God's ineffable name, and blasphemed. So they brought him to Moshe. The name of his mother was Shlomis, daughter of Divri of the tribe of Dan. It then says that they basically put him in prison under guard until Moshe could clarify what the halacha was as what he should do with him, and ultimately, of course, he is put to death. So we know this infamous incident of the blasphemer receives great notoriety for time immemorial, frankly, for having cursed Hashem's name, and then he is ultimately put to death. So there are many instances throughout the desert experience where Bnei Yisrael did things improperly, but usually they are highlighted because of the number of transgressors, whether a small group like Korach and his assembly, which was 250 men, to larger groups like the Meraglim, in terms of the amount of people they impacted, almost the entire nation. They whipped them into a frenzy and ultimately caused great suffering for us, and all the way to the Egel Azav, of course, which implicated almost everyone. But very rarely do we have an instance where an individual does something wrong and the Torah goes out of its way to highlight and emphasize it. Certainly once we've become a nation, you really don't see that. There is pretty much the Mekoshesh, who is the man who gathered wood on Shabbos and is put to death, and the Mekalel, the blasphemer, who we just read about. And while we're not going to go into the details of the Mekoshesh, the gatherer, simply because it's not in our Parsha, I would like to focus on the Mekalel and see if we can uncover what was so particularly heinous about his crime, his offense, that it warranted individual attention in the Torah. Now understand, I'm not questioning the heinousness of his transgression. No question, cursing God's name is punishable by death and is as bad of a sin as one could commit. My question is not why he was punished or whether he was deserving of punishment. Rather, my question is that surely other individuals committed grave transgressions in the desert experience. Why was he picked out and emphasized? So to begin, let's better understand exactly what happened. And in order to do this, we're going to read a few Rashis on that story. So turning back to page 690, it's enough Rashis that warrant me putting on my glasses. So it's now on page 692, if you're following in the Stone Chumash. The first of the Rashis, Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelis, and the son of an Israelite woman went out, says Rashi, Mehechan Yatza. Where was he going out? You know, it introduces saying he went out. Where was he going out? Rabbi Levi Omer Me'olamo Yatza. Rabbi Levi looks at it as a more metaphorical idea. He went out of this world, meaning out of ultimately Olam Haba. He gave it up. Rabbi Brachya Omar Mi Parsha Shilamala Yatza. Rabbi Brachya says he went out from the previous Parsha, meaning we need to look at what happened in the previous Parsha, not Sedra, meaning last week, Parsha, meaning what happens right before this incident. What happened? Laglag v'omar b'yom HaShabbos yarchenu. So he was making fun, he was disparaging. Quoting the pasuk says on Yom HaShabbos Yarechenu that if you look at what was the previous topic, it's about the lechem apanim, the showbreads. The showbreads were brought for God's honor, so to speak, on a weekly basis, and he was making fun of that commandment. Why? Derech hamelech le'echol pas chama b'chol yom, shema pas sonenes shel tisha yamim bidmiya. So he said, wait a minute. A regular king of flesh and blood, what does he get? He gets fresh baked bread every day, warm, delicious bread. And we are serving 9-day-old bread to the King of Kings, meaning that they would bring the bread. It was actually on Shabbos. They would remove it the following Shabbos, so that's 8 days. The next day it would be eaten. Therefore, that's where he gets his 9 days from. And the eating of the bread by the Kohanim was a representation. They were God's agents, so to speak. They're eating the bread for God. So he's saying, therefore, we're serving God 9-day-old bread. Now, obviously, he wasn't aware of the miracle that the Gemara tells us about, that even though it was week plus old bread, it nonetheless was still as fresh as the day it was put out. But nonetheless, he is very, very offended on God's behalf that we chose, that it seems we've interpreted the requirement that we should feed God 9-day-old bread. Very unbecoming. Okay, the next Rashi tells us, Ben Ish Mitzri. So it says that he was the son of an Egyptian man. Hu HaMitzri Shaharad Moshe. Little closing of the circle. This was the Egyptian man that Moshe killed. Very interesting. Finally, let's look at one more Rashi, and then we'll have the information that we need. A little further down at the end of the column, if you're using the stone, Lamate Don. Okay, so it not only pointed out that he was the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man, but it also points out that he was from the tribe of Dan. Says Rashi, Magid Sharasha Gorem Genai Lo Aviv Genai Shivto. So Rashi tells us this is to teach us that a Rasha, a bad person, brings shame, but not just to himself. He brings shame to his father's house, to his father, and he brings shame to his tribe. Okay, so in a very short amount of space, we have learned a lot from Rashi. We learned that he was questioning this person, this Ben Ish Mitzri, and the son of Shlomo Sbas Divri. He was questioning about the lechem panim, that it was an affront to God. He was the son of the Mitzri that Moshe killed. And we know what that story was, of course, when Moshe comes and sees a Mitzri beating a Jewish man, and he comes and he kills the Mitzri using the Shema Mefarish, God's ineffable name. And finally, 3, that even though his mother and tribe were not directly complicit in his act, he nonetheless brought shame and ignominy on them. So in addition to our question as to why this crime was highlighted, we must also ponder as to why his mother and tribe were brought down with him, so to speak. So in order to attempt to answer both of those questions, let us turn to a well-known Mishnah and Gemara at the end of Maseches Sukkah that deals with the Lechem Hapanim, interestingly, but it also discusses another infamous sinner. Says the Mishnah. It is discussing about the different watches. There were 24 watches, which were different family groupings of Kohanim that each got shifts throughout the year, where they were the people who did most of the avoda in the Beis Hamikdash during their 2 weeks that they were on. And it discusses the changing of the guard, so to speak, when one family was leaving and the new family of Kohanim were coming to take over. And it says, Yom Tov Asamach L'Shabbos, if a festival occurred near a Shabbos, ben milfaneh, ben lachareh, whether it was before Shabbos, meaning it was on a Friday or on a Sunday, I'm going to do it in English for brevity, all the watches shared equally in the division of the Lechem Hapanim, because normally the outgoing and the incoming families would divide, because as we said, it was the day after Shabbos, for instance, so they would divide the Lechem Hapanim among their families. It goes on. During the other days of the year, right, when there was no festival involved, Hanichnas notel sheish v'hayotze notel sheish. The incoming watch would take 6 of the loaves, and the outgoing watch would get to take 6 of the loaves. And of course, then 2 weeks later, it would occur the same way. And then there's a difference of opinion that said it was 5 and 7. Then it says, the incoming watch divided their lechem hapanim in the north of the courtyard. The north considered to be the more prominent area, and the outgoing watch in the south, the less promising. And here it gets interesting. Bilga, the watch of Bilga, however, which means the family of Bilga, La'olam cholekes badarom, always divided the lechem hapanim in the south. Even when they were the incoming watch, they did it in the less prestigious area. The tabata kavua, and its ring was permanently fixed. I'll tell you what that means in a moment. The chalona sesuma, and its alcove was sealed. Says the Gemara about this family of Bilga, that as opposed to all the other families, they had severe restrictions placed upon them. They could only separate, or rather divide the lechem hapanim in the south. And their ring was permanently affixed. That means there were 24 rings in the Beis Hamikdash, each belonging to one of those 24 Kohanic families. And what would happen is it would be closed, the ring, it was on the ground, affixed to the ground, and when they had to shech the karbanos, especially the communal ones, because there was a lot of action and they had to do it somewhat quickly, they had to make sure the animals were not moving so there would be no blemishes on these animals during the shechita. They therefore would affix the neck of the animal in this ring to make it easier to do the shechita without the animal moving. The watch of Bilga had their ring permanently locked, never to be used. And instead, they had to use someone else's ring from a different family, and that was a shame and disgrace to their family. And finally, their alcove, they had a little cubby as well, a little area, also locked off. So it seems that this family of Bilga had many fewer rights and a lot more restrictions than all the other Kohanim. So why is that? So the Gemara later on fills us in. Bilga lo'olam chalekas badarim, they always divide in the south. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa. Maisa b'Miriam bas Bilga. There was an incident involving Miriam, the daughter of one of the members of the family of Bilga. Shahamira dasa, she became an apostate, a heretic. The holcha, the nises, le sardiot echad mimalche Yevanim, and went and married an officer of one of the Greek kings. So she not only became an apostate, but she then intermarries. When the Greeks subsequently entered the Heichal, the Beis HaMikdash, this is in the time of Matisyahu Kohen Gadol, who they became the Hashmonaim, of course, and they fight the Greeks. Before that happened, when the Greeks came to defile the sanctuary, she came along with her husband in order to assist in the defilement. Haisa Mivaetes besandola al gabe hamizbeach v'omra lokis ad nosayatam mechalim amon ansha Yisrael. When she got to the altar, she took her sandaled foot and kicked the altar and said, "Wolf, wolf, how long will you consume the money of Israel?" We'll look in a minute why she uses that terminology, wolf. And yet you do not stand for them. You do not defend them in their time of need. So it's very interesting. So she was saying, why did she call the Mizbeach a wolf? Because what does a wolf eat? It eats sheep. It eats lamb. That's what wolves like. She was referencing the fact that the Kohanim did the avoda twice daily. They brought the tamid offering of a lamb in the morning and in the evening every day. And she's saying, wolf, wolf, consumer of lambs. How can you now consume all those lambs, all the money of Israel that was spent to bring sacrifices on you? And now, in your time of need, their time of need, you don't stand up for them. You don't protect them. You see, me and the Greeks are entering the sanctuary, about to defile it. Now, the Marsha says something very interesting. The Marsha says that it's noteworthy that the reference to the altar as a wolf is not necessarily demeaning in itself. Indeed, there are those who explain that Benjamin, son of Yaakov, was referred to his father as a wolf. And as we know, of course, that became his symbol, the wolf, and we also know that the part of the Mikdash was built in Benjamin's territory. So in and of itself, to call the Mizbeach a wolf is not such a bad thing, but we understood her sentiment nonetheless. And when the Chachamim, when the sages heard about this, this takes place after the victory of the Hashmonaim, after the Greeks. Now when things settled down and they heard about this incident with Miriam Bas Bilga and what she did and what she said, Kavu es tabata v'sasamu es chalona. They permanently locked the ring of her family's watch, the watch of Bilga, and they shut off their alcove as well. The Gemara continues. They said, okay, why did all of this happen? So why was it locked off? So some people say it was because the Bilga family always came late. Can't do anything about that. But the majority opinion is because of this incident, that because they had Miriam Bas Bilga do this action, the entire family was punished. So they say, according to that, Miriam Bas Bilga Shamir Dasa Mishum Brate Kansinan Le Lidida. But are you going to tell me that because Miriam Bas Bilga did this reprehensible act, that we penalize Bilga because of his daughter, that we penalize the father and the family, the entire watch, because of the actions of this one individual? As Rashi says, even a father does not deserve to be penalized for the improper deeds of his daughter, and surely his whole watch should not be punished for that. The Gemara goes on. Omar Abaye, Ein kida amri inshe, shusa dinuka beshuka, oda avua, oda ime. So Abaye says, yes, in fact, it's perfectly appropriate to punish the entire family and the entire extended family, the entire watch, because as people say, the utterances of a child in public express the views of either his father or his mother. In other words, this did not come from nowhere. The Gemara goes on, Umishum avua v'ime kansinan l'chul mishmara. But because of her father and her mother, do we penalize the whole watch? Says the Gemara. So, okay, I get what you're saying. Maybe it's true. Maybe the reason why she acted like this was in the home, the father or the mother. But what did the rest of the watch do? These extended families, I mean, they didn't raise her. Why would they be punished for her actions? Says Abaye, Amar Abaye, Oy l'Rasha, Oy l'Shcheno. Woe to the Rasha and woe to his neighbor. In other words, the Rasha takes down everybody around them, everybody associated with them. Though guilt by association is not at all a fair justice promoting concept, it nonetheless is a reality that when you have someone bad, they impact everyone around them. Now that's very interesting, because perhaps you already see a similarity between Miriam Bas Bilga and the Mekalel in this week's Parsha, because Rashi over there told us the reason why that it mentions who his mother was and who his tribe was based on the same idea, that when you have a Rasha, when you have an evil person, they bring shame not only to themselves and not even only to their parents, but ultimately to their entire tribe. So obviously there are many questions we can ask on this Gemara. But at least on a simple level, as I said, it answered one question for us, which is why the Mekalel brought down his family/tribe with him. Because as we said, that the utterances of a child in public express the views of either his father or his mother. In other words, the household and environment he was raised in contributed to his actions. And you know, it's so true. I can very often tell how I am spoken of in someone's house based upon how their children act with me. I'm not talking about a kid who I may have an independent relationship with. You know, we have some running joke or a running repertoire. I'm talking about kids who I have very little to do with. I can often tell from their body language whether I am highly regarded or disparaged in their house. And it's funny because as much as they like doing it, it's really very hard for most kids to lie. You know, they can't help the body language. Neither can we as adults, but they more so. If they hear good things, they will automatically be more friendly. And if not, they will often be standoffish. So we can perhaps understand why the Mekalel and Miriam Bas Bilga's families were somehow complicit in their actions. But there is a much larger question of this Gemara, one that many Mefarshim ask. Was kicking the Mizbeach the thing that put her and her family over the top? It was the kicking of the Mizbeach. Let's review for a moment all the other juicy details that the Gemara gave us. She converted to whatever the Greeks were. It wasn't Catholicism yet. She converted away from Judaism. That's pretty bad right there. And she became an apostate, a heretic, completely shunning the concept of God. And she intermarried. And not only did she intermarry, but she married an officer of the Greek army, the sworn enemy of her people, bent on its destruction. I think we could probably stop right there. That's enough to put her in the annals of the infamous. But then even worse, she even escorts him to the sanctuary to help defile it. I think she's reached the nadir. She's reached the low point right there. And yet, apparently, according to the Chachamim, it was the kicking of the Mizbeach that put her over the top. None of those other things triggered the decree against her family. Think about it. The Gemara is precise with its language. Even though it gives those details, the Chachamim did not list any of those things as the reason why her entire family, its entire watch, was punished because of her. It was only once she scolds the Mizbeach and kicks it that the sages essentially banned her family for life from service in the Beis HaMikdash. Why? Why was that the straw that broke the camel's back? And while we're asking questions, let me add one of my own. Why did the Gemara see fit to include a quote? Right? I mean, this is unusual. They include a quote of exactly what she said to the Mizbeach. Why was that necessary? What does that add? And was it not enough that she kicked the Mizbeach? Was that not dramatic enough? Why does it need to tell us exactly what she said? And that question becomes all the more important after we read the comment, right, that told us that calling the Mizbeach a wolf was not an inherently bad thing. Right? We just said it's a reference to Binyamin, the fact that the Mizbeach consumes lambs on a daily basis. It was not like calling the Mizbeach a disgusting, disparaging name. It was calling the Mizbeach something that may not be considered negative in and of itself. So why do we need to know exactly what she said? Right? If the actual statement wasn't the problem, why do we need to know what she said? And why did that put her and her family beyond the pale? So a number of Mefarshim answer the first of those questions, namely, what made the Mizbeach kicking incident worse than her other deeds, and why her family is blamed for that. Among them, the Satmar Rebbe and Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, I saw them say this, and they essentially say the same idea. That a child can go off the derech, as they say, OTD these days, even with good, upright parents. Her conversion and marriage to a Greek officer could have been a result of teenage waywardness and perhaps even love. Who knows? She read some book, some Greek concept. She was attracted to that idea for some reason. She falls in with the wrong crowd and she starts to follow them. And no, those are not excuses, but they could happen, lo aleinu, even with a proper upbringing. It happens. We see it all the time. Perfectly good, upstanding, righteous parents, and they have a child that does not follow in their way. That's fine. But to kick the Mizbeach, to curse God's name publicly, that's not just going off the derech. That can only happen as a result of something learned in the home, seen in the home, heard in the home. That is why, for both the Mikal and Miriam Bas Bilga, that their families paid the price as well. But that does not answer our second question, which is why the Gemara needs to quote her wolf statement and why that was so objectionable. So as we've spoken of many times before, we must be very wary of the motives behind movements and protests, which we slightly alluded to last week as well. Whether it's the fact we've quoted before that the Alter from Slobodka says that the person who started the animal rights movement owned a dairy restaurant and that's why he did it. Or whether it's the fact that nowadays we see so many movements that have absolutely nothing to do with the real intentions of the people. Whether it's Women of the Wall, who frankly, their leader is tied to a lot of NGOs that are connected with Arabists and Arab parties themselves. Whether it's the Open Orthodox movement, who are looking to merely become unfettered from halacha. Whether it's even something mundane. I remember one time when I was on the board of a school, one of my kids' schools, and they were having a debate as to whether they should raise tuition for the next year. And as I looked around the room, I realized I was the only guy there who actually had children currently going to that school. And so I was against the tuition raise, but I had legitimate reasons. However, I needed to preface my remarks with a 5-minute speech about the fact that I can't really be sure if my opinion here is authentic or not, because I am, as we've referenced before, nogea b'davar. I have a conflict of interest. I have an interest in the outcome. Obviously, having kids, when their tuition gets raised, that's more money out of my pocket. So while I believed I was going to speak of the greater good for the school, it is oftentimes impossible to divorce us from our real motives. But we know that in general, all these isms, all these movements, the environmentalists, and all these other, follow the money, look who's behind it, see what the agenda is. You'll be stunned at what a low percentage of movements have anything to do with their real agenda. They promote one thing, everybody loves it, everybody falls for it, everybody supports it, but those that have started it have nothing to do with that agenda. Be careful of the vocal protesters. Their sensitivities are not always as they appear. Which brings us back to Miriam Bas Bilga and the Makalel. What were the words she scolded the Mizbeach with? Wolf, wolf, how long will you consume the money of Israel? Really? That was her concern? She was so concerned about the Jews' money and how it was being wasted through karbanos? Really? That was on her mind? She had converted. She married the enemy. She hated her people. But she was concerned about their money. Too much money is being asked of them from God. Bah! It sounds great, but in the end, it was just an excuse for her to kick the Mizbeach in righteous indignation. She disparages the God of the people she claims to be defending and protecting, thereby bringing down her entire family in infamy. Perhaps that is why the Gemara must quote her, and perhaps that is why the rabbi saw fit to ban her family for life. For someone to be a sinner is one thing. But to pretend you are doing something good for the people or for the good of God, defending their honor, when in fact you have ulterior motives, is something that cannot be ignored. It's something that must be highlighted. Because it's easy for others to fall for it. And you could bring a lot of people down with your slippery slope. That is dangerous. Be on the lookout, says the Gemara, says the Torah. There is nothing more nefarious than statements that are dressed in beautiful clothing but have a nefarious inside. And perhaps that is why the story of the Makalel is highlighted as well. What did we say precipitated the whole incident? His indignation on behalf of Hashem, that Hashem was being served cold, stale bread. What does he end up doing in the end? He curses God's name. The very same God who he was purporting to defend in the beginning, in the end, he curses him. Thou doth protest too much. That is why the Torah highlights the story, to warn us about those types of people. They employ righteous indignation to achieve unspoken and often nefarious, or at the very least selfish, goals. Make no mistake, often their protests sound reasonable or even righteous, but one must be alert, on guard of their motives, especially with movements that move fast and strong and overwhelmed. As the old saying goes, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean I'm wrong. Good Shabbos.